Hello, my name is John Reynolds. On this episode of Extraordinary Life Stories, I'm talking to Karun Chandhok. Karun is an ex-Formula One racing driver and now an integral part of the Sky Sports F1 broadcasting team. Many of you already know I'm a keen F1 fan. I can really appreciate Karun's knowledge of the sport he loves, and his articulation of information enhances all of our understanding and appreciation of what's happening from a driver's point of view. With a young family and a career that takes him all over the world, how does he juggle work, life and family? With such a busy schedule, I'm incredibly humbled to have the chance to talk with Karun. I'm really looking forward to it. Karun, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell me, who is Karun Chandhok?
Racing driver, commentator, dad, and someone who spins a lot of plates in the air.
Definitely, we'll get to that. But where did it all start? What did you want to be when you were growing up?
As far as I can remember, I wanted to be a racing driver. Which is unusual living in India, growing up in
Absolutely.
India, but my family were in the sport. My dad used to race, my granddad, my grandmother, which if you think of an Indian woman in the 70s, is quite extraordinary. So I grew up around motorsport and cars, and really as far as my living memory goes, I dreamt of being a racing driver.
And how old were you when you first got in a kart or a...
Well, we had no karting in India when I grew up, so I'd never done a go-kart race in my life.
That's unusual, right?
Yeah, for sure. But my dad bought me a go-kart for my 6th birthday.
Oh, okay.
And it arrived in a container as part of the spare parts for his racing. And so we ran a garage, and I would get the mechanics to park the customers' cars in a way, so I'd make this sort of fictional track between the cars and drive through, which gave my grandfather lots of heart attacks. But I was 6, but it's completely different. I would use one set of tires for 2 years and stuff like that. It's completely different to a Lewis Hamilton or a Max Verstappen who are out there week in, week out, building those nerves up and the senses and the feeling that they would need later on in their Grand Prix career. So, I missed out on that 10 years of grounding, really, growing up as far away from the epicenter of motorsport as I did.
But you still got to Formula One. So tell me, from that 6-year-old that got the go-kart to getting into Formula One, how did you do that? What was that journey like?
Tough. Lots of sleepless nights, lots of anxious moments, but also very rewarding. I think coming from a country like India, you felt like you were on another planet compared to where the European racing was. And really, I knew if I wanted to get to F1, I need to move to the UK and live in the UK, especially at that time. The UK was very much the hub. But it just felt so far away, I remember coming to Silverstone for the first time as a kid with my dad. We went to watch a Formula 3000 race. And it was just like, I was, walking like a deer in headlights. I couldn't believe that I was actually standing there. And I think a lot of people in the UK maybe take it for granted because you can just hop in the car and whiz down the road and go have a look. And for me, just to go stare at an empty track on a Friday was amazing. So, I think it was a journey. The biggest challenge was financial, because it's a very expensive sport, but it's a sport which was so unknown in India.
Yes.
I would go out there and try and make these sponsorship pitches to companies, bearing in mind I was a teenager when I started off doing that, and in my early 20s still, when I was, and most of my friends were off at university getting drunk in their university halls, but I was there trying to negotiate deals for hundreds of thousands of pounds and trying to convince companies to invest in me, basically, in my journey. And you had to go sell it to the media and convince the media to cover you and give you the publicity you needed to deliver an ROI to your sponsors. And at that time, it's changed. But at that time, I would go and do interviews. I remember with journalists, we did this event at a go-kart track, and the guy asked me, what's the difference between this and a Formula One car? That was the basic level of understanding from the vast majority of the media. There were some who were specialists and understood more. But, so I had to go out there and sell the sport and sell myself, and then convince people to write about me and do the coverage, and then as the next step get people to invest in that journey, because we weren't multi-billionaires. We were comfortable, but we didn't have the money to fund a racing career. But I was very fortunate. My dad was an eternal optimist, and he joined, put everything he could on the line and financially. And my mum never stopped us going on this mad adventure. She did think we were completely mad, but she never sort of stopped us from doing it. And they mortgaged the house twice over. And my mum was a huge art lover, and she'd collected all sorts of art when she was younger, and sold all of that to fund my Formula 3 career.
So real commitment there.
Yeah, it was a family commitment, unquestionably.
And did you always believe, because to have that mindset to be a Formula 1 driver, I mean, it sounds like you're clearly very driven, very entrepreneurial, because actually you're saying yourself, you're not just racing the car, which is the bit that you see on a Sunday in the cameras. You're actually having to create the whole thing.
Yeah.
Was your mindset set from kind of how your parents brought you up, or did you sort of develop that with just the drive to make it?
I think it came from me, if I'm honest. My ambition was to be in Formula 1.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I talked to Mark Webber about it, and there are a lot of parallels. I think when you grow up so far away from that epicenter, as I called it before, of the UK and Europe, your ambition to succeed has to be much higher, because you've sacrificed so much more.
Sure.
I left my friends, family, comfort of living by the beach to go live in the middle of Northamptonshire in a village. I arrived on the 1st of February and didn't see the sun, didn't understand what was going on.
It's a brutal time of year.
Yeah, I mean, I'd left 35 degrees of sunshine back in India. But your ambition to succeed has to be much higher than the sacrifice. And then for me, that was it. I would finish a race weekend with all the mental and physical strain that brings, get back home on a Sunday night and write the press releases, just email out to journalists in India. I'd write the press release myself because I couldn't afford a PR person.
No.
But I had to do it.
Huge amount of experience gained from all of that,
100%.
Right?
In terms of life experience, it meant that I've gained so much across the board.
Yeah.
But I think that burning ambition was, if I'm not doing this, then somebody else is. And this could mean just sheer hard work and it's so circumstantial.
Yeah.
I had to do what I needed to do for my career, which would be different to a Brazilian or a Japanese or a British or a German driver. But I had to understand what was needed for me. And then I had to come out of that journey knowing I've put everything forward to try and be a success.
Yes.
And I would often get angry with myself that, I slacked off a bit this week. And in hindsight, you look back and think there's so many things you could have and should have done differently and better.
Yeah.
But at the time, you don't know. You're discovering this journey as an early 20-year-old.
No. But you got to Formula 1. And just what you said there as well, where you're hard on yourself and always facing forwards. You got to Formula 1. Did you enjoy it? Or did you find it was consuming, like, how am I going to perform? How am I going to stay in the team? What's next? Or did you actually manage to enjoy that moment when you raced in Formula 1?
I still can picture it. There was one particular moment on the grid in Melbourne, and it was the first time I was on the starting grid. And there's a moment in F1, and all fans who watch F1 will know this, where on the formation lap, everyone goes away. The engineers, the media, the VIPs, everyone goes away. And just the cars set off on the formation lap.
Just you on your own.
And it's just you and those 24 other drivers or 23 other drivers. And for me, that was a special moment where I thought, this is cool. I've achieved this ambition. So there's certain moments. I remember racing at Le Mans. I was the first Indian to race at Le Mans. And I remember coming out of the sort of S's of the early part of the lap and looked across, and there's a whole load of Indian flags on the bank. I thought, this is cool. There's a bunch of people who come and camped out in the mud, in the rain all week. It was horrendous weather all week that year in 2012. But they were there for me. I was the only one on the grid. And so there's certain moments where you take a breath and I think it's important to savor it. But to your point, very quickly you go into work mode of, okay, I'm here to do a job. I'm here to be the best I can be 100%. On that day. So I think a lot of people are guilty of not enjoying that moment. And I tried to. There's certain moments which in hindsight now, I look back and go, I should have savored that a bit more. but that's life, At that time, you're ambitious and you're going forward.
It comes with maturity and comes with reflection. And of course, you're still massively immersed in the sport. I love watching you on a weekend because you've got the driver's perspective, you've got the technical understanding, and of course, you've morphed brilliantly into broadcasting. I'd love to know how that happened, how easy that was for you, and you make it look so easy when you're sort of breaking down on a screen. It's just happened, sometimes minutes ago. Then you've got to present it to the world, explain it, and there's probably technology involved and so on. Tell me how that was for you.
Well, deep down, at the root of all of my my career is the fact that I love Formula One.
Sure.
And I'm passionate about it. And for me, my ambition was always A, to be a driver, but B, if that couldn't happen for a variety of reasons, I wanted to be involved in sport.
Yeah.
And being a commentator, being an analyst was the next best thing, I think.
Yeah.
So when I was 20 years old, I got asked to commentate on the Chinese Grand Prix, and which is quite mad when you think about it. I was broadcasting across Asia to 8 or 9 different countries. Who lets a 20-year-old loose on a microphone to do that?
Yeah.
But that was the first thing. And I did it to earn a living because I was racing in F3. I managed to get some sponsors together to fund the racing, but I still had to live.
Sure.
So I was out working at Silverstone at the race school. Sometimes you'd be standing in the marshal's post waving a yellow flag in the pouring rain all day. But, I thought building up a TV career in parallel or a media career would be helpful.
Yeah.
So I started doing the commentating, found I really enjoyed it. And over time now I've worked with 6 different broadcasters in F1. I've done, car shows, things with, travel shows and all sorts of different things. And I really enjoy it. I think you can never replace the buzz you get of driving. That can never, ever be replaced.
You're as close as you can get to it.
I think you still do get a buzz. When I go on the grid at the Grand Prix, or you walk into the commentary box and the cars line up on the grid and the lights are starting to come on, you feel there's the butterflies are there.
Yeah.
And you start to think, okay, you're invested in the story and you want to do a good job and you want to explain and break things down to people at home. Because Formula One is the most complicated sport on the planet, bar none. There are so many layers of technicalities for the cars themselves. Then you've got the tires, you've got the athletes as the drivers, but you've also got all these other personalities of engineers and team bosses and stuff.
Yeah.
It is so nuanced. It is so complicated.
Yeah.
And we got to try and break it down, explain to people at home on a live broadcast. So for me, I've always been someone who loves the technical side of sport.
Yep.
But I also think it's enjoyable to try and read a race and try and explain to people, okay, he's done this, so therefore that's going to happen next, and then that's going to set off a chain reaction to that. And trying to read that while speaking at the same time is actually quite a challenge to do, but I enjoy it, and I think it's hopefully it comes across that
100%.
There's a passion at the root of everything I do.
That passion for Formula One shared by me. I'd love to know what era or what year, if you could wave a magic wand and race through the sort of Formula One through the history.
Yeah.
When would you race?
I'd pick the early 90s. I think that's when I fell in love with the sport, was late 80s, early 90s. But I think the early 90s cars, I've been lucky to drive some of the Williamses and the Jordan 191 and cars like that. I think they're just brilliant.
Yeah.
They've got enough sophistication in terms of downforce and electronics and the tires and all that sort of stuff, but they were still simple compared to these cars. They were agile, and you know what? Those are the cars, my heroes: Prost, Senna, Mansell, Piquet. Those were my childhood heroes.
I actually parallel that. I think they were the prettiest cars. No little winglets.
Yeah.
The wings were in proportion, and then the names. The drivers were amazing. And actually, the fact that you mentioned you drove the Jordan and so on, it wasn't that long ago, Goodwood Revival, you drove a Ferrari 250 GTO, and at the Festival of Speed at Goodwood, you were up the hill in so many cars. That's another chunk of time away from your family that you're committing to absolutely thoroughly enjoying awesome cars. You're clearly an enthusiast. You make the time to do it.
I love going to Goodwood. I've been going there now for 13 years. And I've become good friends with the Duke and his family, and I'm very fortunate they invite me back to drive all sorts of great cars.
Yeah.
But I'm fortunate that, my family have started to share my passion for the sport. My eldest son is now nearly 5 and loves cars and loves Formula One. And so, although it's a working weekend going to the 3 Goodwood events and the British Grand Prix, I take them along with me, and they get a chance to see the cars, see the paddock. My son took part in the pedal car race at the Revival.
I saw that.
This
It's
year.
really cool. You look like a proper proud dad as well.
And my wife has now become friends with a lot of my other racing friends.
Yeah.
And so we've got genuine friendships with people. And so I think it's now become an annual thing that we as a family look forward to. And it means it's 4 less weekends, including British Grand Prix, that I'm not away from my family, and they can enjoy the journey with me.
Because that's one of the biggest things. You travel the world with what you do, and it's not just the Sunday or the Saturday, depending on how much people watch. You probably have to be there for maybe the Wednesday or the Thursday, right, and prepare. You've got a young family. Even in my capacity, just with my workload and so on, juggling family, work, and life. How do you do that? So when you have been away, do you clear the sort of Monday and Tuesday to try and be around and have a date night and do the school run and so on? How do you do that?
It's very difficult. There's a huge amount of challenge because ultimately I work for myself in the sense I'm doing F1 with Sky, but I'm also doing Formula E. I'm doing stuff at Goodwood. I run a consultancy company doing circuit design work and doing advisory work for different organizations. I work with the FIA. I work with Motorsport UK. So although yes, the most visible part of my life is working with Sky on the weekends, I've also got other work during the week. And it is a massive juggling act because when you work for yourself, it's very hard to say no to work because if you don't work, you don't get paid. It's very simple. Absolutely. So when things are coming at you as effectively a freelancer, it's very difficult to say no, I'm not going to earn that money that somebody's offering to me because instead I'm going to go play with my kids in the park. And that's something that I've really had to work hard on in the last 3 or 4 years is being able to just say no. And I spend a lot of my life looking at my calendar and just trying to say, okay. And I in the end, my wife would like me to break it down across the year and say, this is what I'm doing for the year and these are the days I'm with the kids and this and that. Yeah. I can't. No. I just cannot do that. And so I've got to the point now where I look at it on like a weekly basis. And I look at it and go, okay, this weekend I'm away. So it's important on the Monday and the Tuesday I spend good time with the kids and make sure I'm there. So generally Monday afternoon I'm home and it's my time with the boys and it's just me and the boys and we go off and do something and do dinner and I put them to bed and all that stuff.
Cool.
And then for the rest of the week as well, I try and make sure that there's certain school runs that I do, there's certain, and I break it down to sort of hour, 90-minute blocks and go, okay, I've got all of this other work and but I want to make sure there's a window there that I carve out to spend going for a bike ride or doing something with the boys. But I think where I got caught up and I was struggling really mentally, sort of last year was just too many plates spinning and not looking after myself. And, I spent a lot of time working with a therapist and trying to understand, hang on, I'm struggling here. I'm constantly unhappy in the sense that when I'm working, I'm feeling guilty that I'm not spending time with my wife and kids. When I'm with them, I'm feeling guilty that I'm not working and earning a living, but also, I'm not doing enough to help my parents who aren't getting any younger out in India, and there's work projects out there that I need to help them with from a family side. There's stuff to do around the house, and I was just
overwhelmed.
Yeah, I was completely overwhelmed. And in the end, I realized I wasn't taking enough time for myself. So I spent a lot of time and asking myself, right, what do I need to keep myself calm and sane? And actually, what I enjoy doing is exercising and training and going to ride my bike and that sort of stuff. And I'm not ever going to be able to spend the time training like I did when I was racing professionally. But I found that it's really important for me to still get on my bike 3 days or 4 days a week and just have 90 minutes or 2 hours. I'm not going to do the 100K 4-hour rides anymore.
No.
I can't commit to that. but I need to have that time away from my phone, away from other people, to get my head in gear. And I very often, I carry my phone for emergencies, but I'll very often come straight back in from a bike ride and write down 5 or 6 things that I need to do, or emails, or things I need to do with the kids and stuff, because you just have that. And I wasn't getting mental space.
You've articulated that really well. I get more clarity, and I can just break things apart, and then you've got to make a note of it, or at least put some action in place, or share it with your wife. Actually, why don't we do this? Let's do that. And what are you doing next Friday? Because actually, I'm not doing anything. We haven't seen enough of each other.
Yeah.
And you've got that clarity from what you just did. Because in your career as a driver, you had to be so incredibly physically fit, but and of course you had the mindset. So I was really interested to know what you do and what you continue to do. And I think the fact that you have been open about therapy and so on. We're actually filming in the Jack studio, Just Ask a Question, social media mental health platform. And that is very much about people talking and opening up. What are your thoughts on Jack?
I think it's fantastic, and I think it's really important for people to be open about it. And 10 years ago, I would never have gone to see a therapist. I especially in Formula One, you work in this sort of macho world where people aren't open about the fact that they're struggling mentally with things, and you're told to buck up and just crack on and don't be weak and all that sort of stuff. Man up and just get on with it.
Yeah.
And and I think it's important to recognize when you need some help. And I get still that a lot of people don't want it to be necessarily talking about the fact that they are struggling, and they see it as weakness, and they don't want to put it out there. But to me, it's like any other form of training. You don't hesitate to pay and commit time to go to the gym to work on your physical self, but people still are so reluctant to work on the mental self. Yeah. And to me, so the more perhaps that people like us who are visible and are able to share that, look, this is the journey we've been on, and there's no shame in it. Hopefully it'll inspire other people to do so. And I think what Jack are doing to, I had a look through the website, and I found people that I have heard of and I know, and speaking about subjects that I resonate with.
Yeah.
And there's lots of things there that I probably have. I think the more we're all realizing about mental health, we realize we've all got some form of disorder.
100%.
I think there can't be anyone on this planet who could say they haven't got something.
It's very well said, actually. And if for whatever reason, potentially not you, you're going to know people around you that do that. It's likely family, friends.
Yeah. And there's labels for it, and you can choose to put a label on it or not. But the reality is, ultimately, it's about how do you make sure that you are the best version of yourself on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And only if you are the best version of yourself can you be the best version for your family and for your work colleagues and to deliver from a work perspective, whatever you're doing.
Yes.
And to do justice to the job you've got.
Yeah, I love that. Continuing that sort of vein, we've sort of talked about the kind of failures going into success. What is your definition of success?
Success for me is very personal, and I think it's circumstantial. So would I have liked to be Formula One world champion? Of course. Do I deem my career a failure because I wasn't a world champion? In some ways, yeah.
Interesting.
But I think in other ways, I have to come to terms with the fact that actually, from where I started and the circumstances I was dealt with to start, to actually even achieve the objective of getting to Formula One is a success of some form. And I carry on working in the sport that I love. But it's taken me a while to come to terms with it, because certainly when you're in F1 and it's a thing, and then I fell out of the sport, and I fell out of love with the sport. There was a window there at the end of 2011 and into 2012.
Sure.
But I hated Formula One. I absolutely hated the sport because I'd been spat out by the system. And then you go on this journey of that passion still burns, and you fall back in love with it, and you come to an acceptance of, you know what, I'm not going to be bitter about it. And I think that's really important. You still see a lot of people who aren't in F1 anymore, and they arrive in the paddock and they go, if I was here, I'd do a better job than XYZ. And you have to get over that. And I think to be able to carry on working in the sport and be happy working in the sport, you have to say, you know what, I was dealt a set of cards, I played it, it worked out however it worked out, I've got to move on. And
accept it.
Yeah, and I think so to me, success is being accepting of your circumstances and being happy with who you are at that time.
Yeah, really well articulated. Talking about the guys that have made it, not made it, Lewis or Max?
I think they are both phenomenal talents. And I think, you know, they're just completely different characters. They're chalk and cheese. Yeah. And I think what is unquestionable is if you look back at the history of the sport, every 5-6 years, there's a driver who comes along who is of a special talent and ability, and they're once in a generation. And Lewis and Max are both those.
I agree. If you were a team boss and you could choose one of them to race in your team, who would you have? And I don't know the answer to this.
I think it's very tough. Honestly, I think you could win the World Championship with both of them.
Agreed.
Either of them. You know, I think people, because of the age Lewis is, he's nearly 40, you know, people started to question last year whether he's still got it, whether he can do it. He absolutely can. Yeah. And I think there are still, I'll say, only 3 drivers on the current grid who, if you wanted a guaranteed shot of a World Championship, you got to have Lewis, Fernando, or Max.
Yeah.
I think they are still today your A+, A-listers.
Well, they're demonstrating that, aren't they, as well?
Yeah,
they really are.
Because every week in, week out, they can deliver to that ability. I think, you know, the reality is if you're signing up a driver for the next 5 years, you'd want Max because he's younger.
Yeah.
But if you're signing a driver for the next 2 years, Lewis, Fernando, or Max could do it.
Yeah. Who would be your greatest racing driver of all time, in your opinion?
Jim Clark.
That's interesting.
I think, you know, I wasn't around or alive, obviously, when he was racing, but everything you read, everything you hear from people just says he was phenomenal. In 1965, guy won the Formula One World Championship, the Indy 500, the Tasman Series, the French F2 Championship. And it's just remarkable. It was a given that when he was in the race, he would win.
Yeah.
And the fact he was Ayrton Senna's hero, I think, says a lot about it.
Yes. He took himself away from Formula One to find the opportunity to drive any car, which ultimately it was a Formula 2 race, I think, that he died in.
Yes.
He didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
But the passion for and just the speed that he had is talked about in such high excellence. My family, that's their favourite as well. My grandfather, my uncle, my dad.
Right.
He's the one whose stories I was brought up on.
Yeah, and I think the Jim Clark story underlines why statistics aren't important to judge, you know, who's the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
You know, the
it's
greatest
not about
of all
world
time,
championships.
Exactly. The greatest of all time debate will be a pub debate that can go on for years.
Yeah.
And I think generally there's a consensus on who the top 8 are.
Yeah.
And then it's like, what order do you put that into? And it's impossible. You know, you'll never, it's purely subjective. But I think, to me, Jim Clark and...
No, it was 100% your opinion that I was interested in, because you have that interest in the sport, you have the passion, and you've been in it, so you've actually, you know, you're there every weekend, you're seeing it. But Jim Clark's the answer, which I think is great. There's talk, I read as recent as this morning, of a new Formula One team coming in with a female driver. So the diversity, inclusion side of things, and equality is something that's constantly talked about in Formula One, but it just feels like potentially it's the money that does the talking. I think you're part of a governing body that's trying to influence that for the better. Where do you see that going with Formula One in terms of more people having a chance to get involved and a female driver on the grid?
I think it needs to be a long-term project. I think, you know, it's very easy for people to try and do things for tokenism, and that would be wrong.
The tick box.
Yeah. And then that's across the board. You know, I think it's very important that's done in a meritocratic way.
100%.
So at Motorsport UK, we've got a program called Discover Your Drive, which is targeted to getting young girls between the age of 8 and 11 into karting.
Brilliant.
And then find a talent, because you have to invest in the long term. You have to train them up in a way that Lewis or Max was trained up.
Yeah.
They go through the karting ladder, they go through the right training physically, mentally, driver coaches, all of that stuff to prepare them to move from karts into cars and then go on that journey up the pyramid. So to me, everything about getting a more diverse group of people into the sport, behind the wheel and also off the track in the pit garages and the design offices and things like that, is about long term. It's about STEM subjects in schools. It's about finding kids at a young age to get interested in the sport.
I could keep talking to you for a long time, but we've run out of time. But thank you, because I know how precious your time is, and you've made the time to come and talk with me today, and I've learned loads. So thank you, Karun.
Pleasure. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thanks, John.